I was worried and very concerned about the whole thing. I'd been watching it for the last several days, and it became a bigger threat to us at that point. I packed up the kids and myself with 3 days worth of clothes and headed up to Baton Rouge. And, you know, all the while kind of, I can't believe I'm leaving my pregnant wife behind.
He turns to me and he says, "I'm not leaving you here." And I said, "You have to leave me here. I am the pediatric oncologist on duty. I have very sick, in the middle of induction, leukemia patients and transplant patients. And even if the other doctors were willing to stand up for me who were staying, they can't take care of these families. They can't do this for these kids. I cannot leave." I'm like, this would be like abandonment. Like I cannot leave them. All the men in the hospital, they looked at me and they said, "Oh, no, you get out, you get out of here." And I said, "You don't know what to do with a child in leukemia induction. Like you don't know what to do with a transplant patient. You don't." And I actually had, I think, 3 leukemia kids in induction at the time, which is like that most intense period kind of up front. I had an infant. I had a whole floor. I had a child in the ICU who tried to die every 15 minutes. So I couldn't, there was no way. There were babies who had been there for years because they had a condition, they couldn't leave the hospital. So the nurses kind of took those children on like their own. And when it came time for them to put those children on a helicopter, they lost it. Not knowing like where they were gonna go. A bunch of the doctors, like we kind of went in the lounge and we stood there with the big windows watching the storm, and all the trees were just bowing and like just coming. You could see the roots flying out. The trees were touching the ground. The rain was blowing horizontally. Every now and then the windows would go woo. So I think that when it became apparent that we lost water pressure, that the plan to stay at Children's Hospital, all of us, until we could get relief a week later, a month later, whenever that was, that changed. So they called us back in, and said that we were gonna have plans to start to evacuate the hospital. So I called St. Jude and I said, "I have a few patients that I need to send you. Can you take them?" This is St. Jude in Baton Rouge. I said, I'm gonna tell you in a minute, I'll call you back and tell you who I'm sending. And they were like, "Roger, on standby." I had to go and explain that we were gonna evacuate. I said, "I can't guarantee you that she's gonna survive on that helicopter." I was like, "She probably won't." But once I put her on that helicopter and saying goodbye to that family, and we put them on a helicopter, and I was like, Godspeed. I went to the lounge and I just looked out the window, and my father was in the United States Army, was commissioned at Southern University in Baton Rouge. I'm standing here, a Navy wife of Commander Tami Singleton, United States Navy. At the time, we're a Navy family. And then I guess my expectation was that I was gonna go to that window and look out and hear helicopters and see people coming, and they didn't. That was tough. And I said, "Look, I have to get home to my children. And I'm pregnant, and I need to get home to my husband. If somebody jumps in front of this car, with a gun trying to attack us or anything else, what are you gonna do?" And he hesitated, and I was like, "Give me those keys." When I got home, I had dinner with Damon, and I said, "You need to take me to the hospital." I was like, "We need to go now." And I cried almost hysterically all the way to the hospital. He didn't understand. I knew that I was like, something is not, is not right. She was putting the Doppler, on my belly. So then I find out that my baby, and I'm like 36 weeks pregnant at the time, there's no heartbeat. She was gone. And I delivered, not long after that. And she had, 10 fingers and 10 toes, and
she was beautiful.
She was beautiful. How hard we fought. I lost my child staying here, fighting to take care of my patients. I went back to Children's Hospital after all of that. 2 years later, we had another baby. and we named her Hope. I would do it all over again because everything else mattered, right? I would. If I didn't, Hope wouldn't be here. You know, if I didn't, some of the patients maybe that I took care of may not have, been here. Some of the experiences may have been different for them. But I would do it all over again.